Good evening and welcome to our special evening with Jacquelline Fuller, the Director of Giving at google.org. For those who I haven't met, my name's Richard Haddock. I'm the Chairman of the St. Vincent's Curran Foundation, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Welcome to you all. It's very pleasing to see such an esteemed group of philanthropists and corporate representatives here at St. Vincent's tonight. I'm delighted that you're able to join us for what we hope will become a special St. Vincent's Curran Foundation series featuring speakers of international standing on topics related to developments in healthcare and philanthropy. As most of you would know, the St. Vincent's Curran Foundation is the key fundraising organisation for St. Vincent's hospitals and facilities in New South Wales. For the last 30 years, the foundation has contributed more than $25 million to St. Vincent's and also established the St. Vincent's Curran Endowment, which each year provides grants across the campus. Through the generous philanthropic support of the community, the foundation funds research, workforce development, equipment needs and capital expenditure to ensure St. Vincent's remains at the forefront of patient care. We're honoured to be joined tonight by a leader in international philanthropy, Jacquelline Fuller, the Director of Giving at google.org. Jacquelline is on a very brief visit to Sydney, and we're grateful that she's found the time in her busy schedule to share her thoughts on philanthropy and giving with us in this intimate gathering. For the last 7 years, Jacquelline has worked at Google, where she is responsible for granting $100 million annually in support of education, development, disaster relief and clean energy. One of the main reasons for her visit to Australia was to host the announcements yesterday of the Google Social Impact Challenge grants. Prior to joining Google, Jacquelline worked as the Deputy Director of Global Health at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In 2004, she moved to India to launch a $300 million health initiative to curtail the spread of HIV and help transform maternal and child health, vaccinations and the control of infectious diseases in that country. The scale, impact and innovation involved with the philanthropic initiatives of organisations such as Google and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are impressive and represent a challenge to all of us to respond generously and thoughtfully. Tonight we're very privileged to be hearing from Jacquelline about her first-hand experiences. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jacquelline, who will share her thoughts with us before we open the floor to questions.
All right, well, it's so good to be here, and I have to say, we started tonight by taking a tour, and, at Google we think our buildings are pretty special, and they're built in certain ways to get us to mix and mingle, our cafes and whatnot, but my goodness, after seeing that building, I don't think anything that we have holds a candle to it. So super impressive. And I just want to thank you so much for inviting me to share a little bit with you all tonight. So, when people think about Google and what Google represents, they often think of crazy technology, really big ideas, big moonshot goals that we've set out. So people think about, for example, high altitude balloons that might be able to deliver internet in remote places in Africa, or even, perhaps countries with repressive governments or places where internet's not available freely. Or they think of things like the contact lens that our Google X team just developed that helps measure glucose levels in tears to help with diabetes. Well, in our philanthropy, google.org, which I run the grant-making part. Stephanie is here. She runs our product and engineering side, so she'll be here too if you have questions that you want to ask about what our teams are doing and building ourselves. We really believe that these kinds of big moonshot ideas that are based on breakthrough technology are very needed in the social sector as well. And that, frankly, they're just considerably underfunded around the world, these ideas and these innovators. So that's where we focus. And in fact, that's why I'm here in Sydney, actually, this week, because we launched the Google Impact Challenge. I don't know, did anyone hear of the Impact Challenge before we mentioned it tonight or vote? We got it. Oh, yeah, wow. Look at that. Tish. Tish helped get the word out about that. So we launched the Impact Challenge here in Australia, and what we did is we basically went out to all of Australia, every nonprofit, and said, how would you invest $500,000 and technology to change the world, make the world better, here in Australia or globally? And this is kind of an experimental approach for us. We weren't sure what we'd see. We've done it in a couple places, but we were amazed. We got more than 350 submissions, really big ideas from all across Australia. And we used Googlers. About 1 in 10 Googlers actually in our office actively participated, help us get those down to 10. We put those finalists on our site and then invited the public to vote, which sounds like some of you voted, so thank you. And I think we had over 250,000 people voting, which was fantastic. So just earlier this week, we did a little bit of a live pitch session, kind of like a Dragon's Den, where we had judges listen to the entrepreneurs pitch their idea, answer questions. And so from that, and plus a fan favorite, we awarded 4 grants of $500,000 each. But the caliber of the entries was all so high that we made a decision, actually, that we wanted to fund everybody. So we gave the top 4 $500,000 each, and then the other 6 $250K to get going on their ideas. And you can see here some of the teams and the concepts represented, but I'll give you just a quick word about some of the winners. So Info Exchange, for example, work with the homeless. I learned that actually 1 in 200 people in Australia is homeless. And what percentage of the homeless do you think has access to a phone? Guess, just. It's actually 70% of the homeless have access to a phone. So 95% have any old phone. 77% have access to a smartphone. Now, usually they don't have a digital service plan at that point, but they can use free Wi-Fi. So Info Exchange, their idea is to help connect the homeless population with all the services available using an interface on their phones, available over free Wi-Fi. You can imagine, for example, if you're fleeing domestic violence, you're a single mom with 2 kids, you make all the effort to go down to see if there's a bed available, and you're turned away, as opposed to being able to do that through your phone. Another example, AIME, for example, working with Indigenous kids, is really thinking about how to inspire young Indigenous kids to consider math, science careers, and are going to partner with game developers to create games that involve math and science and open eyes to how fun and creative it can be, careers can be, and their own potential to go into those careers. Fred Hollows, you all probably know very well. So they were actually our fan favorite. So they won the popular vote with the diagnostic tool to take high quality photos of the back of the eye to detect damage due to diabetes. And this sort of on the spot kind of diagnosis, which can work in low resource environments, is something that we have seen more and more. And then the last one is Engineers Without Borders. So this is, sort of right up our alley as Google. And they've developed in their marketing biodigester toilets. So you might be aware, in places like rural Cambodia, 2 out of 3 people don't have any access to sanitation. So they've created a system that not only provides these toilets, which capture the methane and create a revenue cycle, but also have figured out a way to make sure that they're maintained through local businesses. So, and that's an example, Engineers Without Borders, of a kind of a group where we get excited about is Google, because we also want to provide not only our grant, but our grant plus Google. So we really look for projects and areas where we can provide both our resources, but also our Googlers to get involved in the projects. So that was the impact challenge, and which is really why Steph and I are here this week. But just taking a step back, I wanted to share, because at Google, when I first joined about 7.5 years ago, one thing I had to learn very quickly is that the culture in Silicon Valley tech companies, and especially places like Google, so different from what I was coming from like Gates Foundation and government and academia. So the culture is, we call it launch and iterate, which is, capture the data, make your best guess, put together the best program you have in mind, get it out early, get data, bring it back in, pivot, go back out again. So we have used that model at google.org and taken the view that it's okay to fail, because you want to try new things, you want to be creative, but if you're going to fail fast. Learn from it, get back in loop. So we've tried a lot of different things at google.org over the years to try and come down to, how can we have the best ROI, the best return on investment for what we are able to bring to the table. So I thought tonight I could just share 3 lessons that we've learned over those years that are particularly relevant for Google and may have some relevance also for the work that you all are doing as well. So the first lesson won't surprise you, and that's invest in technology. So, of course, Google, big believers in tech, and that part's not surprising. But when we look at the whole nonprofit landscape and the whole social sector and what innovators are trying to do, it's the area that we see is dramatically underfunded and can have some of the biggest breakthroughs in issues that, frankly, are just not going to be able to be solved through incremental approaches or just doing a little bit more, getting more money going to the things that we're already trying. So let's take the example of mobile phones. So, the good news is that technology is becoming cheap and ubiquitous. I mean, we were just talking about genome sequencers. Am I saying that right? Genomic sequencers. And just, what took hundreds of millions, if not billions, and decades to sequence a genome can now happen in a day. I mean, that's just unbelievable. I mean, I think that's just so amazing, the work that you're doing, and on the cutting edge of then applying that genomic data to a personalized genome to think about what's the best treatment, mapping your tumors, for example, knowing more in depth. I mean, that's just incredible power. Well, we see that incredible power even as things as humble as the smartphones that you all probably have in your pocket right now, right? So the average smartphone, for example, today is more powerful than the computers that sent the Apollo mission to the moon. So your smartphone has more computing capacity, more memory, more power than what sent rockets to the moon. And these phones are also becoming more ubiquitous. Around the world, we saw that with our homeless stat, but around the world, more people now have access to a mobile phone than have access to a toilet. So as this computing power continues to rise exponentially, that power is going to be expressed not only in phones, but in robots, in drones, in embedded sensors, in wearables. And the good news is that at google.org, we look out around the world and we can see innovators who are using those technologies, those cutting edge technologies, and applying them to some of our biggest challenges. And that's where we think we can have some of our biggest impact. So let me give you 2 examples of areas that we think have been particularly ripe for tech breakthrough. So the first one is road deaths. So you probably have heard more than 1 million people each year are killed in road accidents. So just to put that in a little bit of context, that would be, taking the United States alone, that's like a 737 crashing every weekday, all year long, just from road accidents. And as it turns out, humans, we're not great drivers. So you might have heard that Google is working on a self-driving car. And so I was actually fortunate enough to dog food this. So that's what we call when you have your employees try out your own products, we call that dog fooding. So I got to dog food and take one of our self-driving cars home for a 3-day weekend. And, you know, when I first took the car out and was first trying, I was so scared and so nervous because it's such a strange experience. And I would just, you know, sit there with my hands right above the wheel, ready to take over. And it was just so jarring. But, you know, over time, because it's got a 360 laser, you know, you look at your dashboard and you can actually see everything moving around you. You can see everything behind you. And the car itself adjusts. It stays out of blind spots of the people next to you. You know, it adjusts its speed. And, you know, over time, I felt much more confident, actually, and relaxed when the car was driving, and I wasn't, you know. So we think that these cars have great potential, not only to reduce the road deaths that we were talking about, but also helping people with disabilities get behind the wheel. So earlier this week, I was speaking and talked to Professor McCallum, who's blind, who's just, I mean, what a great individual, funny man. And, you know, but we were talking in the green room, and he was saying, Jacqueline, you know, get me that car. I want to be one of the first drivers. And so we think it also has great potential for people like him. So the second issue that I'll point out where technology can have a huge impact is that we've been working on is the issue of conservation, and particularly around some of our animals who are going extinct. So take, for example, the African rhino. So there's been a huge spike in the illegal wildlife trade. So trafficking in ivory right now is at the highest level it's been in 25 years. So a rhino horn, like you see on the adults here, will go for about $300,000 on the black market. So that means it's literally worth more than its weight in gold. So trafficking in illegal wildlife is now one of the 5 most lucrative illicit markets in the world. So because of the price of the rhino horn, rhinos are being slaughtered, and on the current path, rhino deaths are going to overtake rhino births within 2 years. As that happens, you enter into the spiral towards extinction that you just can't pull out of. And this is a case where just doing more incrementally of the same thing is not going to get us where we need to be in a fast enough timeline. So this is a place where we need some experimental technology, where we need to try some new approaches and see if we can get a breakthrough. And this technology needs to work in a place like Nepal's Chitwan National Park. So Chitwan is one of the home places of the last remaining rhinos. It's about 360 square miles. There's no roads. It's all sort of forest and wetlands. And the researchers and the rangers patrol on foot and on the back of elephants. And, you know, these rangers are heroes because the bad guys, the poachers, have access to technology, and they're very well financed. But, you know, the rangers around the world, 2 rangers are killed every week doing their duty. So we need to help protect the rhinos and help protect the rangers. So we are partnering with the World Wildlife Fund, and found in them a partner who is willing to try something new, to take some innovative approaches. So we're working with them to use drones and next generation tagging and even Google Glass to try and reduce poaching. So it's still early on in the partnership, but results have been impressive so far. So the drones, for example, you can imagine, can help track migration, can help with breeding and feeding areas, and then they can get that information to the rangers so that they can optimize their paths. And as you can also imagine, if you're a poacher and you see a drone flying, there's a little bit of a deterrent effect as well that happens. And then the other area, we call these wearables for rhinos. You know, you all might have a Fitbit or, you know, a fitness app or a wearable. So for rhinos, we're deploying these lightweight, low-cost, GPS-enabled devices that essentially help convey this real-time location information to the rangers, to the drones, so that they can also help optimize where the rangers and researchers are going. And as we've been doing this partnership together, Sabita, who is a researcher at Chitwan, asked us for Google Glass and said, you know, this could really help me as I'm trying to observe and monitor and track the rhino population and do it more safely, do it more effectively. Because as you can imagine, you know, trying to take notes when you're sitting on the back of an elephant, a little bit difficult. So, you know, in your own life, I'm sure as you're thinking about the social issues you care most about, the problems that you're trying to solve, this might be a lesson that's applicable as well. Thinking about how can these new experimental breakthrough technologies help us think in new ways and bring new solutions to some of our oldest problems. Well, working with World Wildlife Fund, one of the things that we enjoyed most about the partnership is that the team was super flexible and, you know, willing to try new approaches. And this brings me to my second lesson that we have learned and applied to Google, which is to bet on teams. Find individuals, find teams that are agile, nimble, bet on them, and then give them the freedom, give them some oxygen to pivot as needed. See some nods. See some nods. Give them the oxygen that they need and allow them to pivot as they find new information. So let me tell you a story about a nonprofit called Give Directly. So Give Directly does just that. They give money directly to the poor. So they use mobile payment technology, just simple technology on mobile phones, which is ubiquitous in places like Kenya. And they allow the general public to send money directly to poor people. And the poor people are able to use that money and do, get this, whatever they want with it. So when Give Directly first came to us and we were listening to them, I was with one of our senior executives from Google. It wasn't Steph, but one of our senior executives, and she listened to their pitch and just looked at them and said, "You must be smoking crack. Your idea to solve poverty is you're just going to give them money to do whatever they want." But you know, the more that we heard about their concept and got to know this team, we were really sold. And so, for example, one of the reasons is that Give Directly is able to take $1 donated from the general public and deliver 90 cents of every dollar right into the hands of the poor. So those of you who are involved in development work know that the amount of money that actually makes it to the field is usually about 50% if you're lucky. And then to the field usually means you're also then paying all the staff and the consultants and the whatnot. So the money that actually ends up going to the poor can be much, much smaller. They also did something that really impressed us, which is that they ran randomized controlled trials. So RCTs won't be surprising in your world here, but RCTs in development are hardly ever happen. And the other thing that they did is they said, you know what, we're going to share the results of the RCT openly and transparently before we know the results. So that's really a gold standard that we would love to see the whole nonprofit sector embrace, to empower third-party evaluators to measure effectiveness and then publish the results regardless of what they show. And the RCTs that they ran showed that when you invest $1 and give that to, say, a poor farmer in Kenya, you're going to decrease hunger across everyone in the household, improve health outcomes, increase schooling, increase investments in business, and there's no commensurate increase in crime or alcohol or any of those kinds of things that we think about. So we don't think that that all development should be done by just giving money. Clearly, there's going to be wells that need to be dug and schools that need to be built and immunization campaigns and whatnot. But the other thing that we really liked about Give Directly is not just that it's going to help a lot of people by directly giving them funds, but it sets up a baseline for the entire industry that says, hey, if you're going to take $1 on behalf of the poor, then you need to show that you can do more with that dollar, that the outcomes that you're getting, hopefully in a randomized controlled study, are more than the poor would get themselves spending that money. So it sets a standard for the whole industry. So we invested in Give Directly, things were going well, and then they came back to us after about a year and said, okay, we need to make a major pivot. We're doing the nonprofit, it's working well, but we really didn't anticipate or see the whole scale of what's being done, through the government. So governments funnel hundreds of billions of dollars directly to their citizens, whether you're in India or US or wherever. But so much of that money is lost through what we call the leaky pipeline. It's corruption or just antiquated technology. So what they realized is they could get so much more of that money flowing from the governments to the poor if they could improve those systems by licensing out technology. So they came back to us and said, we want to set up a for-profit, Segovia, alongside of the nonprofit, where we can hire and pay tech people to develop those systems and sell those services to the government so that they be a contractor basically to improve those flows and do that alongside each other. So we thought that was great. That was a great pivot, and we reinvested in them. So, taking a look at Give Directly, one of the things we really love about them, this is a team that was created actually by a bunch of PhD economists, developmental economists when they started. But what we really appreciate about them is how invested they are in the data and how they let the data guide them. So our third lesson at Google is let data be your guide. So a few years back, I moved to India and with my family, and this is my husband and my daughters, and actually one of my daughters is here studying in Sydney. She's at University of New South Wales studying computer science, the one on the left. Yes, this was a few years ago. So moved to India to work on HIV prevention, and while I was there, I spent a lot of time in brothels and truck stops and working with injection drug users. And as I was out in these areas, because we were working with high-risk behavior groups for HIV prevention, and as I was out in these areas every day, I would see little girls who had been trafficked and were being sold for sex. So these little girls oftentimes were the age of my girls. And they were being held against their will. They had been taken away from their homes, and they were basically being raped for profit. And it was so disturbing. And that has stuck with me since then. And I think a lot about, what could technology do about a problem like this? Now, the problem is that human trafficking is actually huge, huge industry. So there's more people enslaved today around the world than in any time in human history. So there's more people now in slavery than in the days of the transatlantic slave trade. And it's the fastest growing criminal enterprise globally. It's estimated to be about a $30 billion industry. So this is not something that we can tackle lightly. This is not something that's just going to go away by well wishes. So at Google, at google.org, we were thinking about, what could we do against a problem like sex trafficking or against a problem like bonded labor? And as we looked into the issue, what we discover is what you might find a lot actually against a lot of social causes is that there was just very little data. Very, very little data available. And so people were trying things, but people didn't know where are these girls and sometimes little boys, where are they being pulled from? How are they being taken? Where are they being deployed? Where are the traffickers operating? What are the best interventions? What's proven? What's replicable? Who has metrics? And where is there a plan to share? So that was an area where we thought we could get involved. So we invested about $15 million in partners who are working on the front lines of these issues, largely around helping to gather data and then share that in a very open way. And we worked with some software partners like Palantir to look and do analysis of that data to look for patterns. So as just one example, no one had ever looked at the trafficking data in the United States. And actually the area where we're from, the Bay Area, is one of the biggest trafficking areas in the world, and certainly in the US. But just looking at the data, very, very early, like the second day we pulled it, it was very clear to see the seasonality and that where kids were getting trafficked from and where the bad guys, the traffickers, were most active, moved with the season in a predictable way. Well, just that basic level of information can really help law enforcement to deploy against it in a much more effective way. So wrapping up, so these are 3 lessons that we've learned at Google as we've launched and iterate and tried new things. So 1, invest in technology. 2, bet on strong teams and then let them pivot. And 3, let data be your guide. And I would say, so these are the things that have really come home at Google. And then I would just add, personally speaking, a lesson that I've learned is that innovation is not headquartered in a place like Sydney. It's not headquartered in a place like Silicon Valley, even though Silicon Valley likes to think that it is. And that the best innovators may not be wearing a suit. They may not even be wearing a hoodie, as they do in San Francisco. The best innovators might be people like Daniel. So I met Daniel in a remote village in Zambia. And, I just stumbled across him and this solar charging station that he had created out of scrap material. And he was providing the only electricity in his village. So the only lights, the only mobile phone charger. And what's amazing about Daniel is that he was largely self-taught because he had to drop out of school because his parents couldn't afford the school fees. So just a closing thought is that I think that we need to invest in people like Daniel because he's one of the innovators who are changing the lives and could, with just a little bit of fuel, with a little bit of help from us, could really help change the world. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jacqueline. And Jacqueline is more than happy to answer some questions. So I'll hand it over to you. But this is being recorded, so if you could just wait till a mic, we've got a couple of mics, I think, comes to you before you pose your question. Now, I am disappointed that the best innovators aren't in suits.
Well, some of them are. Some of them are.
Any questions, please?
Don't be shy.
They are shy, aren't they?
Wow, they're just overwhelmed by the 3 lessons.
Maybe starting with the end of your talk.
Yeah.
So the example you had of innovation in a very poor country. I'm maybe putting you on the spot a bit by asking this question, but well, I've lived in Central Africa myself, so I saw some of those amazing situations myself as well. But maybe you know of 1 or 2 other examples that you've run across yourself, because it is. Yeah, it is an amazing example of how people can be resilient, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and that's, look, we've done this impact challenge like we did here in Australia, we did it in India. And, amazing thing about doing it in a country like India is that you have basically every problem known to humanity is like concentrated, right, in one place. So you've got climate change and pollution and environmental degradation and poverty and domestic violence. I mean, everything you can think of, health challenges right there. But the thing about India that's fascinating is that they have one of the highest levels of engineers of anywhere in the world. So they are graduating of vast numbers of very technically astute folks. And I think that innovation happens often locally with the people who know the challenges, who care about those challenges because, hey, my cousin had dengue, so I care about dengue. I've seen this happen in my village, so I know it. So I think magic can really happen in places where you have the two combined. The problems, but you've got the innovators right there as well. So that's part of why we came up with this challenge model, is because we wanted to go places and then open it up and crowdsource it a bit, because if you rely too much on the people that, I read about them in, Time Magazine, or I saw someone speak at a cocktail party, you're going to get the same sort of elite, So we try to open it up and find people.
Jacqueline, hi. I'm Julie White. I'm chair of the Coca-Cola Australia Foundation, but
great.
I'm also chair of a youth mental health charity called Inspire, which Google supports. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Look, one thing as a proud Australian, can I just correct you on that homeless statistic?
Oh,
it's not
please.
1 in 200. It's actually 0.5% of the population. I hate you to go back to America and tell the world that 1 in 200 people are homeless.
They're all we need to help the people in Sydney. They're all homeless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Look, I'm very interested in the innovation that Google does in its funding, and I guess my question is around your sort of windows of opportunity. I mean, how long do you look at a grantee in terms of sustainability? So are you there for the long haul, or are you give them a kickstart and then move on? I'd like to understand a little bit about that approach when you're funding, when you're looking at who you're funding and for how long.
Sure. So the short answer is it varies, but I would say in general we've been more of the kiss and run type, where we view ourselves as the catalyst. So we want to find the innovators, find the big ideas, give them the fuel they need, but really then we haven't stuck with them over the long haul. We've shifted a bit over time where so for example, we just reinvested in Give Directly, which is one of the ones I spoke about. It's kind of a balancing act for us because we see so many opportunities that we like to be able to invest broadly, but then sometimes you'll get a team or an idea that's just doing so well, and normally in those cases we'll try to introduce them to other funders, or maybe their sustainability plan is really getting the government to take it up once they've proven an idea. So we do help with that. But we haven't done as many of I know a lot of corporates, for example, will take more of an approach of like, hey, let's pick 3 and just be with them for 5 years. And part of that is frankly just Google's character, that we have a hard time looking at my fellow Googlers. Can you see us sticking with anything for 5 years? Like,
that's a long time in Google world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stick with the 9.
Hmm?
You'll stick with the 9, Google.
Our name, yeah. We have stuck with that. We have been consistent there.
There are a few safety partners that we have stuck with for some years now, but that is
Child safety.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are some areas that happen like in cooperation with .org or even outside of .org where we have partners. So, for example, there's one area, computer science, where we invest in every year. Because frankly, it's important to Google. It's important for our own business. We released our diversity statistics earlier this year, and frankly, it showed we have so much work to do. When it comes to women, we have about 17% of our technical team is women, is female. Our Black and Hispanic Googlers is about 3 to 4%. So we have a lot of work to do as a company. So we want to help the pipeline for business reasons, but also we would just want to open up the tech boom and all of the value and the opportunity that is represented by the broader tech sector and make sure a broader swath of society has access to that. So there are certain partners, for example, within a theme like that, child protection, computer science, where we stick with it year in and year out, and we do have partners that we've had for a number of years.
I was actually listening to a Scientific American podcast this morning, and it was talking about philanthropy in the United States. And they'd repeated a survey 6 years apart. It was sort of, they looked at IRS data about how much people gave to charity, to say that, and the message I got from it was that pre and post GFC, poor people were giving more and the wealthy were giving less.
Yes.
It was a very sort of sad 2 minutes of radio. Is that true? Is that a global thing? Is philanthropy sort of contagious? Is it getting better?
You know, it's interesting. We were just actually talking about that today. If you look statistically, and I know the U.S. statistics most, not sure if this applies in Australia, but if you look at income strata, the working poor, the poor and lower middle class give a higher percentage of their income to charity than the rich do, than the upper middle class and the rich. So, and that has nothing to do with the global financial crisis. That was true 20 years prior to that as well. It's just a consistent thing. You know, and it's interesting because if you go to places like Africa or India that might not have as much of a culture of philanthropy the way that we understand it in the U.S., where you write a check to a nonprofit. But if you go to, my friend who's been in Africa, you go to Africa, you go to a typical village, and there's an AIDS orphan, they're usually adopted, you know? So people who are poor, who have nothing, open up their home to take in others. But then you look at, well, resource people in a place like Sydney or the Bay Area, and how many people like open their home to the poor or the orphan, you know, in their own neighborhoods. It's just, you know, so it is interesting. Now, in terms of philanthropy in general and what are the trends, one thing I'm enthusiastic about is that I do think for a lot of folks, they want to give, but they're standing on the sidelines because they're saying, I'd really like to give, I just don't know what to give to. And I don't want to give to something that's corrupt. And I don't want to give to something that's just going to make the problem worse. So I actually think that there are some new things happening online that can help people find charities that they like. There's sites like GiveWell that will go out and find great charities. The other thing is that, you know, we're social animals as people. And people really value knowing what their friends and their family and people that they admire have given to. So there's lots of new ways that you can get a social signal online. You know, think about it like if you're on a social network and you hear that so-and-so is doing something, okay, well, I kind of, boy, he actually knows a lot about child protection and he's a supporter of theirs. I'm going to support that. So I think that there are some tools and platforms that can reduce the friction, but it's also an issue of the heart, right? So who knows if that'll change.
Hi, I'm Brad Brennenberg. I work at BlackRock Funds Management. So I'm just quite interested to know how Google engages its staff in philanthropy. What type of policies, what type of things do you have at Google that entice the philanthropy activities?
Yeah, and then I'm going to ask you what you guys do.
No problem.
So a couple of things. So for individuals, we match $6,000 up to $6,000 for any charity they want to give to. So any registered charity globally. So that's our way of saying, you know, we're gonna back the ones that you pick and you put your own money behind. We also do a lot of volunteering together, and, you know, days of service and this and that. From the Google.org model, we've really found over the years that we can have much more leverage if we have a grants plus Google model. So for example, with all of the 10 people who just won the Impact Challenge, these organizations, they have a Googler, that's what we call our employees, a Googler assigned to them, nonprofit manager, whose job it is to find out, okay, you've got the $500,000, you're going to do this project, but what do you need? Do you need help with marketing? Do you need help with HR? Do you need engineers? Do you need, you know, leadership? Like how else could we be helpful to you? And then that person pulls in Googlers who want to work on that specific project. So those are some of the things we do. What do you?
I mean, that's excellent. That's really great. We do the similar things up front in terms of matching. I think it's $5,000 per person for us or something. And
Yeah.
we give every staff member 2 days per year where they can go and do any philanthropy activities they want. But I love that model where you actually get the people involved. We do lots of volunteering, but that's actually working on a particular project. I think that's quite awesome.
Yeah.
Stephanie, Janine Kirk. What you do as a company is to provide solutions to problems, essentially. Is there an opportunity for a not-for-profit that has a great idea, not a technical idea, but a great idea, so might be dealing with, as we are working with a partner around community preparedness and resilience for natural disasters, to come to you with what they're doing, and then you provide actually the technology solution. So a lot of the ones that you've done here, they've got the solution, they come to you, you back them. But in fact, lots of not-for-profits aren't technologically driven, and therefore to come to an organisation that can look at what you're doing and say, we think we can develop a technology solution for you, and this is what it is. And that's your contribution to the outcome. So probably taking it back a step further and providing your skill set to help that not-for-profit actually find a technology solution, rather than them coming to you with a technology solution and asking you to back it.
We don't do a lot of that, although we get asked. It's probably the number one thing we get asked, aside from give us money, is can your engineers just come and, because a lot of times the teams will say, we don't even know enough about the technology to know what we need, but if you all would just come. We find that we're not as effective in that model, and part of it is that we have a pretty unique set of engineers, right? There are a certain set of things that, say, search engineers are going to be optimized for. But we do have some partnerships where we have, invested in them, where we can come alongside of them and say, so for Give Directly, for example, we had an engineer who, of her own volition, was very interested in them, and so she went and coded for them their whole system. So that does happen, but we don't do it in a much of a formal way. But Steph here actually works with our crisis response team. That we do some work ourselves, but then I don't know, Steph, do we do something like her model she's suggesting there?
Hi, yeah, we have a crisis response team that has, over the last 6 years, developed a lot of tools to help in response after a natural disaster, both from getting critical information like evacuation routes, shelters, availability, gas availability, and putting that on Google Maps and other Google products. We also built a tool called People Finder, which was used in Japan and Haiti and lots of other places to help create a database so that people who had loved ones that they couldn't locate had a resource to go to. And then we also do a lot in early warning and detection. So across our properties, Google Search, our Android phones, and on Google Maps, we do early warnings in more than 37 countries to help get people out of harm's way before an incident hits. So we have lots of different partners like the CDC that we've partnered with over the years, but it's not the model you're describing. We don't go into or work with a nonprofit on their specific ideas, but sometimes the best way to deploy the solutions we're building is in partnership, or sometimes we need partners for data to power our products, because at the heart of it, Google's all about information. So we haven't used your model to date, but I'd be certainly happy to talk more.
The one exception that we did this week, just because Ebola, is we had specific requests from some folks on the front lines as we were in conversations with them about how could we be most helpful in terms of giving money? Where do you need it? Or there's particular things you want to do or see funded that the typical big funders aren't going to do, technology solutions. And out of that conversation, it really became clear that if we could just take some engineers and give them to them for a while, that would just be enormously helpful. And given the curves of the epidemic, you want to do it early. You want to just get that out immediately. So by exception, I would say we will do something like that.
I would also say Google, we believe in launch, iterate, and experiment, as Jacqueline's already discussed, and this embedding with MSF is an experiment for us. So we think we're going to have a big impact. We're putting a number of our best engineers on the ground in London with them, and then we're going to assess in a quarter and 2 quarters, was it a good investment? And were they differential resources that really changed the trajectory of in-clinic tracking tools, which is what we're going to work on.
Thank you for your talk, Jacqueline. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about more about your appetite for risk. It's something that we hear a lot about. Philanthropy, you should be taking the risk. So what's a healthy sort of failure rate, and how do you sort of help the not-for-profits manage the aftermath of perhaps not being successful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, which is that I think that philanthropy should be risk capital, and so little of it actually is, right? And so we do believe in being risk capital. We believe in taking informed risk. So I can say, for example, I review our portfolio of who we've invested in with our CFO, CEO at the end of the year. And when I go this year, we will definitely have failures. You know, we will have teams or ideas that we invested in that just absolutely did not work and failed. And sometimes those are, but we pivoted and it was, you know, this worked, but some of them are just failures. But I have a lot of executive support for that, as long as we made informed choices along the way. So our philosophy is to be willing to have that fail fast, learn from it, pull out the learnings, help the sector, help that organization. So the second part of your question is, and then what about the nonprofit that, you know, maybe you invested in and it didn't work out? You know, it's funny. The culture that we're in at Google, I think failure is just looked on so differently. It's almost a badge of honor, you know? It's like, right, Steph? Yeah, how many startups have you been a part of? You know, 4 that failed and 1 that made it. You know, so we have, I guess, a little bit more appetite for it, but I know in traditional funding circles, it's just very, very difficult. And, you know, I've been on boards of nonprofits and in the room where people are thinking about their funding base and, you know, maybe wanting to try this whole new approach, but just thinking, our donors just want us to feed the poor and, you know, provide blankets after the hurricane. And, you know, to say we invested all of that in an experimental, you know, rhino tagging or, you know, whatever it is, drones, doesn't go over well in most boardrooms. So I know that there's not as much, I think, risk capital out there as there should be.
Are there any other questions? And Shanti's value is not a badge of honour yet, it's Vincent. If there aren't any more questions,
I think we got one last one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
How do you view marketing in the context of the leaky pipe and charities undertaking marketing?
So how do we do what?
How do you view marketing, so charities undertaking a lot of marketing, in the context of that leaky pipe that you were talking about? You spoke a lot about...
Are you speaking English? No, I'm just kidding.
you spoke a lot about a leaky pipe, I think you called it.
Right, yeah. So for Give Directly and the money going from the government to the hands of the poor?
Yes, and you spoke about almost 2 sets of rules you've just talked about, really.
Yeah.
There's one for the corporate world and there's one for the non-profit world.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. And then I guess the non-profit world, you know, how do they market effectively? And, you know, do you see it an issue of using $1 million to raise $100 million?
Yeah. Well, we do have a Google marketing expert in this room with us, Tish, who find her in the after, because she will have more informed views. You know, it's interesting when we think about how can we invest for most ROI, sometimes, honestly, the biggest thing that we can do is to help a nonprofit figure out how to tell its story effectively and, in a sense, market or talk about what they're doing, get more donor support, get others to come alongside of them. So we do actually allow some of the money. We're not just saying take this money and do the tech. we try to give also general operating support alongside of all of our project grants so that they can do things like learn how to tell their stories in the same way that we know on the business side, right? That effective communications, effective marketing is just part of how you do your job. And it's about how you build momentum and advocacy and support alongside of that. I don't know, Tish, did you have anything you want to add?
I've worked with many charities over the years, and I think fundamentally there's so many wonderful tools out there that don't require buckets of money to be able to tell your story and to reach people and to really, really harness the people who want to support you. And I'm not saying that, oh, it's really easy. It requires a lot of work and persistence and really building up your supporters and making sure that they come along the journey with you. And I think for me, that's one of the fundamental things that a lot of charities forget. They sort of think of the very traditional marketing ways of advertising and splashy parties to get more funders interested. And as you rightly pointed out, there are a lot of people out there who you won't reach in that way, who would very happily put their hand in their pocket and support you. And I think that in a lot of ways, those are the people you need to reach, and there are very scrappy and sort of, different ways that you can do that without spending buckets and buckets of money. And I think that now in the world we live in, where social networking and social platforms are a great way to reach people, that's often a really powerful way to have discourse with those people who want to help you.
All right.
Is that all? If there is. Jacqueline, first of all, thank you very much for coming tonight and giving us your time. I know, as I said earlier, you have got a tight schedule. Thank you for sharing with us what's happening at Google and how they're attempting to, I guess, contribute in a philanthropic way to address some of the problems that our society has. Thank you for the lessons you've taught us, the 3 lessons, and thank you, I guess, for giving us enthusiasm as the way we should maybe start looking at philanthropy and the way we can perhaps help change society in a little way. And I believe we have a small, not necessarily small, but we have a gift for you.
Oh, thank you so much. So kind. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe, no, my pleasure, and I believe there's some refreshments for us just outside. Thank you, everyone.